So welcome all back after our quick break. I know it was kind of like sudden, like, oh my gosh, already time to break, and then we'll come back. So hopefully folks are ready to pick up the conversation again. I saw some link sharing in the chat window for other resources that were talked about. Again, feel free to ask questions in the chat window. I know as folks are alternating answering, they're also going to the chat window to answer questions, but also I can repeat them for folks as well. Just for those who might have just come into the second session and weren't in the first, we just had a brief context overview of two courses, one that Dr. Bodine teaches, in which they talk about yellow fever and also tuberculosis. And then a second course that Joanna's been teaching, which incorporates OER for COVID-19 and social justice, but then also includes modules that can be taught in a variety of other contexts and courses as well. So that's sort of where we were. We were talking about build up from the math side and introducing some programming and introducing biological context. And I want to flip the discussion a little bit and now ask a question to each about how do you build the social justice context? Like, how do you get students to really be ready to think about things that are quote unquote not math, right? Like, I mean, maybe that doesn't happen in your classes, but I know sometimes it does. And so how do you get students really engaged in that process?
Can I go first?
Go for it.
Okay, it's a great question. And at my university, there's a lot of talk around racial justice issues, coming from the capital of the Confederacy and from what used to be like a very, very white, rich university. And it's, we've been trying to diversify our student body and our faculty. The students are well aware and talking about this on campus as part of the whole campus community is focused on this. So it's not like I'm the only one bringing it up and it's a new topic for them. And it's very welcome discussion on my campus. I'm not saying everyone agrees or buys in. I'm just saying I'm not like the first one to bring this up. Now, sometimes I have had where they're surprised that it's coming up in a math classroom, but that's the minority. Like it doesn't happen much. And I haven't ever gotten pushback. So just for instance, I'm teaching financial math right now. I think I've told you this before, Carrie, but like at the beginning of my financial math class was created, not by me, by someone else to teach the second actuary exam, which is about interest theory. And so when I inherited the class, it was, very like, you get a loan for whatever. But, I found it's a much more interesting class if you put it into a financial markets context, starting from when financial markets were first created. And like one of the earliest financial markets was the slave system, was slavery. And so we listened to a 1619 podcast about the financial market around slavery. And, I've gotten I didn't understand why we were listening to this slavery podcast in my math class, but then I figured it out. And they really respond well to thinking about these issues. So around COVID, they were, there's been enough press now saying that different groups were differentially affected, that they're interested and they want to try to help figure out why that's happening. And there's so much to read about it that it's not hard to find a context. And I find the students very open to discussing it.
I will echo that sentiment as well. I have found that in general, students are more, I think that there was more hesitancy on my part in the beginning to engage in these discussions than there was on the part of the students. But one thing that I will add is in my class, we talk a lot about how science and math doesn't happen in a bubble. And that the point of modeling is to answer pertinent questions. And so often, pertinent questions can involve issues of social justice, and those are reasonable things to explore with models. And therefore, it is a topic that we should be discussing in a math class. And yeah, in general, I have not found students to be hesitant to want to, I mean, maybe, you know, 1 or 2 students are, but in general, the students are overwhelmingly excited about having this sort of broader liberal arts discussion within a math class. And they like seeing different components of their education coming together. And actually, I'll add too that this semester for the first time, so there is a colleague of mine in the International Studies Department who is teaching a class on global health politics. And so she and I we're working on getting a joint speaker in the second half of the semester, and then seeing if we can find a time where we can get the students in both classes together to have a mutual conversation about, you know, some students are studying this from the, you know, the political side, and we have students studying it from the math and the modeling side. What can they teach each other? What can they bring together in a discussion? So hopefully that will be fruitful, but that will be later in the semester.
That's really cool. And I like the idea of leveraging the kinds of questions and expertise that are already coming up on campus and thinking about it as a way to synthesize what students are learning from a lot of different disciplines, and then sort of like, then the sum is bigger than the parts kind of thing, right? So that's really cool. It's a good thing to remember. I wonder, in terms of leading them down the path to asking questions, do you ever talk about sort of the role of models and like when you don't consider social justice, like what things could go wrong, or that part of it?
I'm not sure about what would go wrong, but just like what we're missing. So you can see like averages, you know, totally leave out these effects, simple things where you don't see one community's rates are so much higher than we're the average, you know, we did, because it's not considered, because you just see everybody as a homogenous group. I also wanted to echo what Erin was saying, like just being in other social justice and math workshops and groups, I found that the faculty are much more hesitant and nervous because we're so used to teaching these very like logical, factual, you know, A squared plus B C or whatever equals C squared. It's just like they wanted, you know, I've been in groups where we wanted to do it. We were just so scared, you know, scared to have this like, where there's not an answer necessarily, but I found it extremely satisfying, and the students are really interested.
So let me just like right off that, because what helped you cross that bridge? What helped you say like,
great
okay,
question.
I'm gonna stop being scared and I'm gonna do something about it, or I'm gonna find a resource to make myself feel more comfortable about doing this? Or how did you cross that bridge?
Very slowly. So I was very nervous to do it myself. You know, I don't know who's in my room or what's going to come up. And I don't feel necessarily like an expert on this topic, whereas I do about, you know, calculus. So we created some projects. They were in Primus about simple ideas for calculus for incorporating some social justice ideas. And you know that, you know, even Stewart has like a Gini index study, and so I like modified that. That's not in there, but you know, just try a little bit where you don't have. At first, I didn't ask any hard questions. You know, I was just want to just go in the water a little bit and see if I can bring these topics up at all. And then eventually, it got easier, and the students would say, "What about this? What about that?" And I'm like, "Okay, this is okay." So just, I didn't feel like I had to do a whole class at first. You know, I would have one exercise in calculus. And I realized it's not as scary as it seemed.
So I'll say for me, the very first time that I taught this course, I think it was in 2013 or 2014 was the very first time I taught this this particular modeling course. And so the general structure of the course is, you know, we explore existing models for the first half of the course, and then the second half of the course, the students are asked to take those models and, you know, modify them or make their own model. And one of the groups made a model of the trends in public opinion on the legalization of gay marriage. And so, I mean, that opened my eyes, you know, just that very first class. So like the students the students are interested and they're willing to engage in topics that I thought, oh, maybe we shouldn't be talking about this in a math class. But I mean, they were there. They wanted to have these discussions. And I think that opened my eyes that the students were ready, even if I was feeling hesitant. And so, I mean, I agree with Joanna. It's been like a longer, harder road for me to, fully feel comfortable having these discussions, and I guess, and in leading these types of discussions in a class. But one of the things that I have found that has helped is I've been engaging in more discussions with faculty across the campus. So I have another colleague in the anthropology department who teaches a class on race and class, and having lots of discussions with her about the way that she structures discussions in her class. That has really helped me feel more comfortable having these conversations in class, giving me more tools to work with.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I've noticed myself doing the same thing. Like, you all do a great job. That was not part of my training as a mathematician. Like, what tools can you show me? Really, really good thing to sort of remember. I also find, like, you all stressing that the students are ready and they engage really fully with this, which is a good reminder, because I think sometimes we center the wrong individuals in our classrooms. like which students do we want to center, and coming back to that kind of over and over. I see that we're already almost like it feels like we're like, are you half over the second session? So I just wanted to remind folks again that they can, ask questions in the chat. And I see that there's like some chatter going on around some of these. And one point that's brought up is sort of getting students to see like we don't have the answer. So like, let's explore this together, and sort of cultivating that general and normalizing and cultivating the sense of curiosity among students, and certainly is something that you've talked about. I heard, so I'm going to go back to a question that's in the chat. There was a mention of a 1619 podcast about slavery and sort of the initial economics or market of slavery. Do you have any other particular texts, readings, podcasts, whatever that you assign around the discussion of social justice?
I was looking for these over the break and I just couldn't find them quickly enough. I do have a combination of, there's a podcast, just like a short news clip, and some interviews by like a local news broadcasting around tuberculosis and around things that are being done in the rural South around tuberculosis. And so that's a nice entry point for the students to start talking about those issues. Because it's not just an academic perspective, it's also the perspective of the people living in those communities, which I think is helpful.
Yeah, that's really nice. I think the rest of mine was more just incorporated into the materials. So we would be looking at, parameters for SEIR model, and then asking questions of like, what would change if you had different scenarios, and they could include, some of these topics that we've discussed. And so it wasn't go read this thing that's just about social justice, but it was incorporated throughout. Or like in Calc 2, I do a Gini study, but it's a little different because it's not just like, what's the index and what does it mean, but like, what is, it asks more questions about our society but then like it's broader about international societies, because income inequality is not always bad in every type of economy. So, just thinking more internationally and broadly about it also is like income the best measure, should we be measuring wealth, and then talking about social justice there. So I don't have any other where I just say read this thing, but it's incorporated elsewhere.
So one other question, just generally talking about social justice, and it fits really nicely into this disease modeling context, and just as you start looking for information, asking questions, it feels like a natural extension. So I'm just curious about if there's other places or other things you do in other classes, sort of just like you mentioned, Joanna, in terms of Gini coefficient. Are there other places where you found a way to cross that bridge in other contexts?
Actually, let me change my answer to the last thing. We do read I think it's chapter 16 from the book Sapiens before we listen to the 1619 podcast. And it's not about social justice, but it does have a lot of history about where things were terribly done, right? Like, and so there are ideas beyond just like, look how great we explored and conquered, you know, it has a more realistic context. So I think that's really nice way, because the students, a lot of whom are business majors, I frequently get like, oh, we learned about this, but not like that, you know, or this is a new idea to me. So I think bringing it into for my financial math class, I find that the most satisfying, because we're also reading The Big Short, you know, about 2008 financial crisis, and that has a lot of ethical questions about it. But then in like calculus, you know, we did some of the exercises that I gave out in that website, and I think a lot of those are asking these questions. So I don't know if I answered your question at all.
So I also teach applied calc on a regular basis, and I've been making a concerted effort. So I've amassed a lot of different, mostly biological examples over the many years I've been teaching that course. But I've been making a conscious effort over the past couple of years that each year I'll find one more social justice application. So I think what I did last semester, I found data for incarceration rates in the United States, both like collectively, but then also broken down by race. And so I think, I mean, there is a lot of data out there. It's sometimes hard to start parsing through all of these things. And at some point when I have more time, I'll start writing all of these things up and putting them out there. But yeah, at the moment, I'm trying to make it through COVID and teaching remotely. But yeah, I think there are lots of interesting applications. And I mean, the one about incarceration rates was, you know, I was listening to a podcast and I said, huh, that's interesting. I bet I could come up with a, you know, just a simple model for that, and then have the students study, you know, the rate of increase of incarceration rates in the United States. And yeah, I mean, that it turned out to be a really interesting example. And once again, like, I was more hesitant to incorporate that in than, I mean, the students loved it and they thought it was great and interesting. And you know, a timely topic. I taught it for the first time last semester, and it was, you know, in the midst of Black Lives Matter protests around the country, and so the students were really excited about it.
Yeah, we had a similar article. The article in Primus, we had an exercise about mass incarceration, but also about evictions. And what you said is exactly right, Erin. It was trying to explain how to create exercises like that. And the thing was like, find some rate data, right? Like, if you have rate data, you can do a ton of calculus, and you know, and you can look at numerical approximation of integrals really easily. And this gives us a lot of information. Yeah, so if you're thinking of like some topic and you can see it as a rate, this is gonna make it easier.
Yeah, and there's a great comment too about just general questions that any quantitative literacy or statistical literacy course could ask. And I found this, I shared a thing that I use from a project called Figure of the Day, where you like put up a figure and it doesn't have like any axis information. And there's even a disease version. I haven't checked it out yet, but there's a disease version of it. And you get students to like ask questions about the picture and like try to figure it out. But there are some really nice ones there that like questions that like folks made, you know, either before or after you show them the axis, but sort of saying like, oh, I noticed that they represented gender as binary, and that was like, and they were like already asking those questions. I was like, oh, you bring it. Like, I didn't even go there. And like, you just brought it.
Yeah,
So I
that's
love, like,
really
again,
cool.
that goes back to that natural curiosity, and then just like giving them the space and the interesting data to ask those questions.
Yeah, we have an exercise like that on our website too, where there are a ton of graphs, and some of that is like, how do you visually represent something in a way that you want, and some of them are terrible and have these issues, and so I think that's really interesting, and you can draw really terrible conclusions from the way that they're
Depending on how the data is. Yeah.
And then some of them are fantastic, so there's also like a build your argument module.
I just wanted to say thank you to everyone. The time is already up. You can hardly believe it. I feel like we just got started, but I wanted to thank in particular our panelists, Dr. Bodine and Dr. Wares, for chatting with us today, and for everyone else for joining us. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, and feel free to email me if you have any other questions or want any of the resources